I was making dinner when a cop suddenly knocked at my door. Sir, your wife was in a deadly car crash an hour ago. It can't be. No, she's upstairs sleeping. The officer looked puzzled. I took him upstairs to our bedroom. The officer pulled his gun. Sir, he warned, back away from her. That's not. Have you ever faced a betrayal so profound, so utterly devastating, that it shatters your soul and transforms you into someone utterly unforgiving? What if the two people you trusted most in the world, your own wife and your closest business partner, didn't just plot to rob you blind, but to erase you from existence entirely, and you decided to turn the tables in a way that would make them truly wish they'd never been born? Prepare yourself, because this is a story of calculated revenge, a man pushed to his absolute limit, and a chilling lesson in what happens when you cross someone who never forgets. Listen, Marco Christian was more than just a successful businessman. He was a force of nature. At 42, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the Seattle skyline shimmer under the afternoon sun, he commanded respect and a healthy, undeniable dose of fear. His steel-gray eyes, sharp and analytical, had witnessed countless high-stakes business deals where he'd crushed competitors without so much as a flicker of an eyelid. Marco Christian didn't just win, he obliterated. He built Christian Industries from nothing, a pure act of will forged in the fires of abandonment after his father walked out on their family when Marco was only 20 years old. While other kids were lost in video games, Marco was studying, working, meticulously planning his future. He swore then, to himself, that no one would ever abandon or betray him again. By 25, he owned 3 successful tech startups. By 30, he was worth $50 million. By 35, he married Jenny Neal, a stunning brunette from a middle-class family who seemed genuinely impressed by his relentless success. The early years had been good, Jenny supportive, even as Marco's single-minded pursuit of wealth meant 18-hour workdays. They had their daughter, Casey, bought the sprawling mansion in Bellevue, and lived what seemed like the American dream. But you know how it is, don't you? Success often breeds complacency, and complacency, well, that's when betrayal, like a venomous snake, slowly slithers in. It started subtly. Sir, your wife called about dinner tonight, his secretary would announce through the intercom. Marco's jaw would tighten, almost imperceptibly. Jenny, his wife of 16 years, mother to their 14-year-old daughter, Casey, the woman who had once looked at him with genuine adoration, was now reduced to scheduling dinners like a cold, impersonal business appointment. Then there was Wesley Stratton, his 6-foot-tall, charming business partner, the kind of man Marco had seen potential in, mentored, and made his partner, giving him a staggering 40% of the expanded business. Marco saw Wesley as a younger reflection of himself, a man who understood the climb. But that trust was about to be obliterated. One evening, a text from Wesley popped up, emergency meeting tomorrow, need to discuss the Henderson contract. A routine message, yet it felt off. That same evening, Marco arrived home to find Jenny in the kitchen, wearing a black dress that hugged her curves perfectly, too perfectly for a quiet dinner at home. You look beautiful, he said, kissing her cheek. She tensed, just slightly, at his touch, a barely perceptible shift. Thank you. How was your day? Her voice carried a forced cheerfulness that grated against his nerves, like nails on a chalkboard. Productive, he replied, watching her carefully. Wesley mentioned an issue with Henderson. Are you familiar with that client? Something flickered in her eyes, a fleeting shadow. No. Should I be? A little too quickly, a little too defensive. Just curious, Marco said, his gaze unwavering. You seem to know more about my business lately than you used to. Then Casey bounded into the kitchen, her blonde hair, so like her mother's, bouncing as she moved. Dad, can I sleep over at Melissa Connor's house this weekend? Melissa Connor. Marco's mind automatically filed away the name. Her dad's a police officer. She's new at school. Really nice. Marco studied his daughter's eager face. At 14, Casey was still innocent. Still believed her parents loved each other. Still believed the world was fair and just. We'll see, he said, ruffling her hair, a bitter taste in his mouth. During dinner, Marco watched Jenny with surgical precision. She checked her phone 3 times, each time trying to hide it from his view. When she excused herself to use the bathroom, she took her purse and her phone. That night, after Casey went to bed, Marco sat in his study, a glass of 20-year-old Macallan in his hand. He'd built an empire on the principle that information was power. He knew the financial records of every competitor, the weaknesses of every rival. But he'd been utterly blind in his own home. The next morning, Marco called his old friend Gerald Christian, his younger brother, who worked as a private investigator in Portland. They hadn't spoken in months, not since Gerald had criticized Marco's obsession with work over family. "I need you to look into something," Marco said without preamble. "Always straight to business with you," Gerald replied, a hint of weariness in his voice. "What is it?" "My wife," discreetly. "And Wesley Stratton." There was a heavy pause on the other end. "Marco, are you sure you want to go down this road? Just do it." Marco's voice was as cold and hard as steel. He was ready for the truth, no matter how ugly, how devastating. 3 days later, Gerald Christian sat across from his brother in Marco's study, a thick manila folder between them like a loaded weapon. "You're not going to like this," Gerald said, his voice heavy with regret, his eyes unable to meet Marco's. Marco's expression remained utterly impassive as he opened the folder. Photos spilled out onto the polished desk, Jenny and Wesley at a hotel, kissing passionately in Wesley's car, entering an apartment Marco didn't recognize. The timestamps showed this had been going on for 8 months, Gerald said quietly, watching his brother for any sign of a crack. Marco's jaw was clenched, but he showed no emotion. "There's more." Gerald's voice dropped. "They've been planning something. I followed Wesley to a meeting with a guy named Tommy Travis. He's got connections to people who can create new identities. False documents. Passports." Marco's fingers drummed against his desk, a subtle, rhythmic tapping, the only outward sign of the cold, volcanic rage building inside him. "Go on." "I think they're planning to disappear together. Wesley's been slowly liquidating assets, converting them to cryptocurrency. And Jenny." Gerald hesitated, clearly pained. "She's been photographing documents from your home office. Your insurance policies, business contracts, offshore accounts, everything worth stealing." Marco stood, walked to the safe, pulling out several files. He noticed they'd been moved slightly, so subtly that most people wouldn't catch it. But Marco noticed everything. How much does Wesley have access to? His partnership share and what Jenny's feeding him. Potentially everything, Marco. Your entire fortune. Marco's laugh was cold, hollow, and utterly devoid of humor. "And my wife thinks she can betray me and walk away rich with my business partner, no less." "Marco, what are you thinking?" Gerald asked, shifting uncomfortably, clearly worried about the dark turn in his brother's eyes. "You can divorce her. Cut Wesley out of the business." "No." Marco's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and decisive. "They've declared war on me. And in war, the only acceptable outcome is total victory." Over the next week, Marco maintained his normal routine, a perfect facade of the grieving, unsuspecting husband, while secretly gathering intelligence with ruthless efficiency. He installed hidden cameras in his house, hired a tech expert to monitor Jenny's phone and computer, and had Wesley followed around the clock. The picture that emerged was even worse than he'd imagined. Not only were they planning to rob him blind, but they'd also recruited help. Ivan Graham, Marco's accountant for 6 years, was actively auditing, helping Wesley hide assets and prepare for their elaborate escape. The plan was chilling in its simplicity and audacity. Jenny would fake her own death in a staged car accident. The insurance payout would be enormous. With Marco devastated by grief, Wesley would gradually transfer the business assets offshore. By the time anyone realized what had truly happened, the 3 of them, Wesley, Jenny, and Ivan, would be living comfortably in a non-extradition country, completely off the grid. But they had tragically underestimated Marco Christian. They saw a successful businessman who'd gotten soft with age and wealth. They didn't see the 12-year-old boy who'd sworn that no one would ever abandon or betray him again. Marco's plan began to form, not just to stop them, but to destroy them so completely, so irrevocably, that their betrayal would serve as a brutal, unforgettable lesson to anyone else who might ever dare to cross him. This wasn't just about money, it was about pride, about the ultimate reclamation of his life and dignity. Marco's first strategic move was to contact Melissa Connor, a former military police officer turned private security consultant. She was small, blonde, and deceptively innocent-looking, perfect for what he had in mind. "I need someone who can play dead convincingly," he told her during their meeting at a downtown cafe, his eyes boring into hers. Melissa raised an eyebrow, a hint of professional intrigue in her gaze. "That's an unusual request, Mr. Christian. I'm willing to pay you $50,000 for one day's work." "I'm listening." Marco explained a carefully edited version of the situation. His wife was planning to fake her death to steal his money, and he wanted to turn the tables on her. "So, you want me to pretend to be your wife's body?" she clarified, her expression unreadable. "Exactly. You'll play the victim of a car accident. A medical examiner who owes me a favor will declare you dead. Meanwhile, my wife will be safely secured elsewhere, very much alive, watching her perfect plan crumble from the inside." Melissa studied him carefully, a professional weighing the risks and the reward. "And then what?" "Then she faces the consequences of her choices." Total victory, Melissa. Total. The next phase required Marco to meticulously manipulate his own security system. He had the house's surveillance equipment modified so he could control precisely what was recorded and when. He also had a secret room constructed in the basement, soundproof, climate-controlled, comfortable enough for a long stay, yet utterly inescapable. Wesley, oblivious to the web tightening around him, played right into Marco's hands, suggesting they accelerate their timeline when he learned that Marco was planning to review all business partnerships at the end of the month. "The car accident is set for this Friday," Wesley told Jenny during a phone call Marco was monitoring, his voice dripping with false concern. "Tommy has everything arranged. You crash the car, I create the scene, you slip away. By the time anyone figures out the body isn't yours, we'll be long gone." But Marco had already intercepted Tommy Travis, offering him double what Wesley was paying to switch sides. Now Tommy worked for Marco, ready to execute a very different, far more devastating plan. Friday morning arrived, gray and rainy, perfectly mirroring Marco's internal landscape. Jenny kissed Marco with lips that felt like ice against his cheek, a final, hollow gesture. "I'll see you tonight," she said. Her last lie. Marco spent the day putting the final pieces in place, each action precise and clinical. He had Ivan Graham's office searched, finding the damning evidence of embezzlement that would send the accountant to prison. He had Wesley's apartment bugged and his communications monitored, ensuring every whisper, every secret was heard. At 4 p.m., Marco received the call he'd been expecting. "It's done," Tommy said, his voice flat. "Your wife's car is wrapped around a tree on Highway 18. A chilling pause. "But don't worry, she never touched the steering wheel." Instead, Jenny Christian was unconscious in the back of Tommy's van, having been drugged during what she thought was a final meeting to coordinate their escape. She would wake up in Marco's specially prepared basement room, very much alive, but completely at his mercy. Meanwhile, Melissa Connor lay motionless in the wreckage of Jenny's car, her body positioned to hide her face, waiting for the police to arrive and declare Jenny Christian dead. Marco Christian, his face a mask of carefully constructed grief, smiled to himself. He put on his most grief-stricken expression and headed home to play the devastated widower. The real performance was about to begin. Marco was in the kitchen, meticulously setting the table for their anniversary dinner, a morbid detail he relished, when the knock came. He'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, rehearsing his reactions, perfecting his performance down to the slightest quiver in his voice. Officer Bruce Jackson stood at the door, his uniform crisp despite the steady rain. Behind him, a younger officer with sympathetic eyes waited by their patrol car. "Mr. Christian, I'm Officer Jackson with the Bellevue Police Department." Marco's face immediately contorted with concern, a perfect mask of bewildered innocence. "Is everything all right, officer?" Sir, I'm afraid I have some very difficult news. Your wife was in a fatal car accident an hour ago. Marco's carefully crafted expression of shock and disbelief would have won him an Academy Award. His face went pale, his hand gripped the door frame until his knuckles were white, and his voice cracked perfectly when he spoke. No, that's impossible. She's upstairs asleep. She had a headache and went to lie down. Officer Jackson exchanged a glance with his partner, a look of somber understanding. Sir, I understand this is difficult to process, but we found her vehicle wrapped around a tree on Highway 18. The medical examiner has confirmed. No. Marco's voice carried just the right note of desperate denial, bordering on hysteria. She's here. She's upstairs in our bedroom. I'll show you. He led the officers through his house, his steps urgent, desperate, yet meticulously controlled. The performance was flawless, a man clinging to hope against impossible odds. Jenny, he called out, his voice hoarse with feigned anguish as they climbed the stairs. Jenny, wake up. There are police officers here with some mistake about you being in an accident. The master bedroom door was slightly ajar. Marco pushed it open, letting the officers see into the room first. On the bed, under the covers, was a feminine form. Blonde hair spread across the pillow, face turned away from the door. See? Marco's voice was thick with relief and vindication, a breathy gasp. She's right here. She's just sleeping. But as they approached the bed, Officer Jackson's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. He'd seen enough crime scenes, enough deception, to recognize when something was profoundly wrong. Sir, he said, his voice now carefully controlled, colder. Step away from her. The figure on the bed wasn't breathing. Wasn't moving at all. Officer Jackson drew his weapon, his partner following suit. Sir, step back now. Marco's expression shifted again, from relief to confusion, then to dawning horror, another perfect, Oscar-worthy performance. What's wrong? What are you doing? Jackson approached the bed carefully, his gun trained on the motionless figure. When he reached out to check for a pulse, his hand found cold, waxy skin. It was a mannequin, a life-sized, incredibly realistic mannequin, dressed in Jenny's clothes, wearing her jewelry, with a blonde wig styled exactly like her hair. Mr. Christian, Jackson said, his voice now official, cutting through the silence. I need you to put your hands where I can see them and tell me where your wife really is. Marco's performance shifted yet again. Now he was a confused, grieving husband who couldn't possibly comprehend what was happening. I don't understand. She was here when I went downstairs. She was sleeping right here. Sir, this is a mannequin. Where is your wife? I don't know. She was here. Someone took her. His voice rose with a panic that seemed entirely genuine. 30 feet below where they stood, in Marco's specially prepared room, Jenny Christian was just beginning to stir. The walls were soundproof, the door was steel, and there was no way out except through Marco. She would wake up to find herself in a comfortable but inescapable prison, with a monitor showing her exactly what was happening upstairs. Watching her husband give the performance of a lifetime, while her lover and co-conspirators waited for news of her death. The trap was sprung, and now the real game could finally begin. Jenny's consciousness returned slowly, like swimming up through dark, heavy water. Her head pounded with a dull, insistent ache, her mouth was dry, and she couldn't, for the life of her, remember where she was. As her vision slowly cleared, she found herself lying on a comfortable bed in a room she'd never seen before. The walls were painted a soothing cream color, there was carpeting on the floor, a small, pristine bathroom visible through an open door, and even a kitchenette with a mini fridge. It looked almost like a luxury hotel suite, but for one crucial, terrifying detail, there were no windows, and the door was clearly reinforced steel. A large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall flickered to life, showing her husband's face. But not Marco as she knew him. This Marco looked haggard, desperate, pleading with police officers. She was here. His voice came through unseen speakers, filled with a manufactured anguish. Someone must have taken her. Jenny's blood turned to ice as she realized what she was watching. This was live footage from their own bedroom, where a mannequin wearing her clothes lay motionless on their bed. A second camera angle showed Officer Jackson interrogating Marco in their living room. "Mr. Christian, your wife's car was found in a fatal accident. The body at the scene has been identified as Jenny Christian, but now you're claiming she was kidnapped from your bedroom." "I know how it sounds," Marco said, his voice breaking convincingly. "But I'm telling you the truth. She was sleeping upstairs when you arrived." Jenny's hands began to shake uncontrollably as the full, horrifying scope of what was happening slammed into her. The car accident, the fake death, Wesley waiting for her to escape, none of it had gone according to their plan. Marco knew. Marco had known all along. An intercom crackled to life in her room, cutting through the chilling silence. "Hello, darling." Marco's voice, calm, controlled, and utterly devoid of the desperation she'd just witnessed on screen. "I trust you're feeling better. You were unconscious for quite a while." "Marco," she whispered, her voice barely a breath, then louder, a surge of adrenaline making her demand. "Marco, what have you done?" "I've given you exactly what you wanted, Jenny. You wanted to disappear, to leave your old life behind. Consider this your fresh start." His words were a cruel mockery. "Let me out of here," she screamed, rushing to the steel door, pounding on it uselessly. "I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, according to the world, Jenny Christian died in a car accident this afternoon. There's even a body to prove it." "Well, close enough for the initial investigation." On the screen, she watched Wesley's BMW pull into their driveway. He got out, his face a perfect mask of concern and grief, ready to play the supportive business partner, consoling his friend's loss. "Wesley's here," Marco continued through the intercom, his voice laced with dark amusement. "He's come to comfort me in my time of grief. Isn't that touching? The same man who's been sleeping with my wife has come to offer his condolences." Jenny watched in growing horror as Wesley embraced Marco at the front door, both men playing their roles perfectly. Wesley had no idea that his lover was very much alive and watching from her underground prison. "You're insane," Jenny shrieked, tears of frustration and terror stinging her eyes. "I'm thorough," Marco corrected, his voice a chilling bomb. "Did you really think you could steal 16 years of my life, rob me blind, and just walk away? Did you think I'd never find out about the offshore accounts, the false identities, the insurance fraud?" Wesley was now in their living room, talking to the police officers, shaking his head in feigned disbelief. "Marco, I can't believe this happened. If there's anything I can do." "He doesn't know, does he?" Jenny asked, her voice trembling. Marco's voice held dark amusement. "Wesley still thinks you're dead. Still thinks his plan worked perfectly. He's probably wondering why he hasn't heard from you yet, but he'll assume you're being cautious, waiting for the heat to die down. This is kidnapping. Murder. They'll figure it out. Will they? The police have a body, a car accident, a grieving husband who clearly had nothing to do with it since he was home preparing dinner. Wesley will provide my alibi. He spoke to me an hour before the accident. Can confirm I was home cooking." The camera showed Gerald Christian arriving at the house. Marco's brother, there to provide family support during the tragedy. Jenny had always liked Gerald, thought he was the more reasonable of the two brothers. "Even Gerald's playing his part," Marco said as if reading her thoughts. "He's quite the actor when properly motivated. Gerald understands family loyalty, something you never learned, Jenny." Over the next 2 hours, Jenny watched a parade of people come to offer their condolences. Neighbors, business associates, even Casey's friends' parents. Everyone believed Jenny Christian was dead, and they all witnessed Marco's grief-stricken performance, a masterpiece of controlled anguish. Casey herself was at her friend Melissa Connor's house, conveniently away from the chaos, being told the devastating news by phone. "Our daughter," Jenny cried, finally breaking down completely. "You're letting her think I'm dead." "Our daughter will be fine," Marco replied coldly, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Better than fine. She'll inherit everything that would have been yours, plus the insurance money. She'll be very wealthy, and she'll never know her mother was a cheating thief." "Marco, please." "The real question," Marco interrupted, his voice stealing, "is what happens to you now? You wanted a new identity, a fresh start. I'm prepared to give you that, but it won't be the comfortable retirement in Costa Rica you were planning with Wesley. On the screen, Wesley was saying goodbye to Marco, promising to help with funeral arrangements, to be there for whatever Marco needed. The concern in his eyes looked almost genuine. He's good, Marco said dryly. I'll give him that. If I didn't know better, I'd almost believe he actually cared about you. As the police and visitors finally left, Jenny watched Marco close the front door and slump against it, dropping his grief-stricken mask for the first time all day. The smile that spread across his face was cold, predatory, and utterly terrifying. He looked directly into the camera, a chilling acknowledgement. Phase 1 complete, he said. Now the real fun begins. 3 days after Jenny's supposed death, Wesley Stratton sat in his downtown Seattle office, staring at his encrypted phone like it held the answers to the universe, or perhaps the end of his world. No messages from Jenny. No confirmation that she'd reached the safe house Tommy Travis had arranged. Nothing. Her silence was a growing, gnawing worry that began to consume him. A hesitant knock on his door interrupted his frantic thoughts. Marco stood in the doorway, looking utterly haggard, hollow-eyed, the picture of a man utterly devastated by grief. Marco, Wesley said, standing quickly, his own mask of concern snapping into place. You shouldn't be here. You should be home resting. I can't just sit in that house, Marco replied, his voice barely above a whisper, carefully crafted to convey immense suffering. Everything reminds me of her. I need to work. Need something to occupy my mind. Wesley nodded sympathetically, even as his mind raced, mentally calculating how this unexpected distraction could work to his advantage. A distracted, grieving Marco would be easier to manipulate, easier to bleed dry. Of course, Wesley murmured, ever the supportive friend. Whatever you need. What Wesley didn't know was that Marco had been monitoring his communications for weeks. Every encrypted message, every frantic phone call, every hushed meeting with co-conspirators, Marco had seen and heard it all. In her underground prison, Jenny watched the interaction on her monitor, a bitter taste in her mouth, seeing Wesley's false concern for the husband of the woman he claimed to love. She'd been watching for 3 agonizing days now, seeing how easily he slipped into his role as the loyal, supportive friend. Quite the performance, isn't it? Marco's voice came through her intercom, chillingly calm. I'm almost impressed by his acting ability. Almost. He doesn't know where I am, Jenny said, her voice raw. He thinks I escaped. Yes, he does. And that uncertainty is eating at him. Watch his hands. See how he keeps checking his phone. He's desperate for word from you. On the screen, Wesley was indeed fidgeting with his phone, stealing quick glances at it whenever he thought Marco wasn't looking, a telltale sign of his growing anxiety. Marco, Wesley said carefully, smoothly transitioning into business. I know this is difficult, but have you thought about the business? The Henderson contract still needs attention, and there are some financial decisions that can't wait. I trust you to handle it, Wesley, Marco said, his voice laced with manufactured vulnerability. You've been such a good friend. I don't know what I'd do without you. Wesley's smile was warm and, to an outsider, utterly genuine. We'll get through this together, Wesley said, laying a hand on Marco's shoulder. Jenny wouldn't want you to give up on everything you've built. You're right, Marco agreed, a cold fire in his eyes that Wesley couldn't see. She'd want me to fight. To keep building the empire we started together. That afternoon, Marco's next move began with ruthless precision. Ivan Graham, the accountant who'd been helping Wesley embezzle funds, received an unexpected visit from federal agents, Agent Stephanie Hogan and her partner, another of Marco's perfectly cast actors. Mr. Graham, Agent Hogan said, her voice authoritative, sitting across from Ivan in his office. We've received information suggesting that several business accounts have been manipulated over the past 6 months. Ivan's face went pale, a sickening realization dawning on him. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Because our forensic accountants have found a very interesting trail of transactions, money moving between accounts, cryptocurrency purchases, offshore transfers, all traced back to companies you manage. Agent Hogan slid a folder across the desk, its contents a fabricated but utterly convincing web of deceit. That's just the beginning. We've also found evidence suggesting you've been working with others to systematically drain assets from Christian Industries. This is impossible. Ivan stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. I would never. The evidence says otherwise. Now, you can cooperate with our investigation and help us understand who else is involved, or you can become the fall guy for the entire operation. Your choice. What Ivan didn't know, what he couldn't possibly fathom, was that Agent Hogan wasn't a federal agent at all. She was another of Marco's hired actors, and the evidence was meticulously constructed to look authentic while actually proving nothing illegal on Marco's part. But the psychological pressure was immense. Within an hour, Ivan was ready to confess everything, implicating Wesley Stratton as the mastermind behind the entire embezzlement scheme. In her prison, Jenny watched security footage of Ivan's breakdown with growing horror. You're framing them, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm revealing their true nature, Marco corrected, his tone dispassionate. Ivan was stealing from me. Wesley was planning to steal millions. I'm simply accelerating the timeline. They'll figure out those aren't real federal agents. Will they? By the time anyone thinks to verify Agent Hogan's credentials, Ivan will have already confessed to multiple felonies. And Wesley? Wesley will be so busy trying to cover his tracks that he won't notice the trap closing around him. That evening, Wesley received a panicked, incoherent call from Ivan. They know everything. The feds. They have evidence about the accounts, about the money transfers. I think someone tipped them off. Wesley's blood ran cold. What did you tell them? Nothing yet, but they're coming back tomorrow with a warrant. Wesley, if they trace this back to you. Calm down, Wesley said, though he was anything but calm himself. Let me think. But thinking was exactly what Marco wanted Wesley to do. Every moment Wesley spent worrying about the fabricated federal investigation was a moment he wasn't trying to contact Jenny, wasn't wondering why their perfect plan had gone silent. On her monitor, Jenny watched Wesley pace his apartment like a caged animal, making frantic phone calls to lawyers and checking his escape routes, his face etched with pure terror. He's abandoning you, Marco observed, his voice cutting through the intercom. The moment he thinks he might get caught, thoughts of rescuing you disappear entirely. That's the man you threw away 16 years of marriage for. Stop it. Jenny screamed, pressing her hands against her ears. Look at him, Jenny. Really look. He's not trying to find you. He's not worried about your safety. He's only concerned about saving himself. As if to prove Marco's point, Wesley's next call was to Tommy Travis, but not to ask about Jenny's whereabouts. Instead, he was demanding a new identity for himself, wanting to disappear immediately, leaving Jenny to whatever fate awaited her. My wife is dead, Jenny whispered, watching the man she'd risked everything for abandon her without a second thought. No, Marco said softly. Jenny Christian is dead. But you're something new. Now the question is, what do you want that something to be? The trap was working perfectly. Wesley was panicking, making mistake after mistake, burning every bridge in his desperate attempt to escape. And soon, Marco would spring the final phase of his revenge, the one that would destroy not just Wesley's life, but everything he'd ever hoped to build on the ruins of Marco's marriage. 1 week after Jenny's supposed death, Wesley Stratton made his ultimate, fatal mistake. Desperate to escape what he truly believed was a relentless federal investigation closing in, he accessed the hidden accounts containing the money he'd meticulously stolen from Christian Industries. Unaware that Marco was monitoring every single digital move he made, Wesley began transferring funds to his escape account in the Cayman Islands. The moment the transactions initiated, Marco struck with the precision of a predator. In her underground room, Jenny watched the security monitors with bated breath as multiple police cars, their lights flashing blue and red, surrounded Wesley's apartment building. But these weren't Marco's hired actors this time. These were real Seattle Police Department officers, armed with genuine warrants. How, she whispered, her voice barely audible, the reality of her situation sinking deeper. Wesley just moved $2.3 million in stolen funds across international borders. Marco's voice explained through the intercom, calm and clinical. That's federal wire fraud, money laundering, and theft. I simply provided the evidence to the appropriate authorities. On the screen, Officer Bruce Jackson, the very same officer who'd responded to Jenny's accident, led the team that broke down Wesley's door with a forceful smash. Wesley Stratton, Jackson announced, his voice booming as Wesley was handcuffed in his pajamas, his face a mixture of terror and disbelief. You're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. This is insane, Wesley shouted, struggling against the cuffs. I haven't done anything wrong. But the evidence was overwhelming. Marco had meticulously documented every illegal transaction, every stolen dollar, every false document. Wesley's own greed, his desperate attempt to flee, had provided the final, inescapable rope for his hanging. The beautiful part, Marco continued, his voice a low, satisfied hum, is that in trying to escape with his stolen money, Wesley proved he's guilty of everything I'm accusing him of. No jury in the world will believe his claims of innocence now. As Wesley was dragged away in handcuffs, a defeated, humiliated wreck, Jenny noticed something that made her blood freeze. Standing in the crowd of onlookers was Gerald Christian, Marco's brother, who was supposed to be providing family support during this difficult time. But Gerald wasn't watching Wesley's arrest with surprise or concern. He was watching with a chilling satisfaction, taking photos with his phone, almost documenting the moment. Gerald was part of this from the beginning, Jenny realized, a new layer of betrayal washing over her. Gerald's been my eyes and ears for months, Marco confirmed, his voice holding no emotion. Every piece of evidence against Wesley, every detail about your affair, Gerald gathered it all. Family loyalty, Jenny. Something you never understood. The next visitor to arrive at their house was Casey, Marco's 14-year-old daughter, returning from her extended stay at the Connor family home. Jenny watched through the monitors as her daughter hugged Marco, both of them crying, Casey from pure, agonizing grief, Marco from what appeared to be profound relief at having his daughter home. Dad, I still can't believe Mom's really gone, Casey said, her voice breaking, tears streaming down her face. Marco held her tightly, stroking her hair. I know, sweetheart, but we'll get through this together. Your mother loved you more than anything in the world. Watching this agonizing scene, Jenny finally broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. Her daughter was in agony, believing her mother was dead, while Marco comforted her with meticulously crafted lies. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was staggering. Let me see her. Jenny pleaded through the intercom, her voice raw with anguish. Please, Marco, let me see Casey. Casey is mourning her mother, Marco replied coldly, his voice devoid of any warmth. Jenny Christian is dead. Remember? You made that choice when you decided to fake your death and abandon her. I wasn't abandoning her. The plan was to bring her with me once everything settled down. The plan was to steal $50 million and disappear, leaving me and Casey to deal with the aftermath. Don't rewrite history now that you're caught in your own web. Jenny fell silent because, in her heart, she knew he was right. The plan had always been about escaping with Wesley, and Casey had been an afterthought, a detail to be dealt with much later. I've made my decision, she said finally, her voice raspy, defeat etched into her face. And I choose exile. But I have conditions. Marco raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something almost like curiosity in his cold eyes. You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Jenny. You want me gone permanently. I can give you that. But I want regular updates on Casey. Photos, school reports, confirmation that she's happy and healthy. I want to know my daughter is thriving, even if I can't be part of her life. Marco considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Agreed. Anything else? I want to know that she'll never learn the truth about me. Promise me that whatever story you tell her about why I died, it's something she can live with, something that won't destroy her memory of me. Marco nodded again, a flicker of something almost human in his eyes. She believes you died instantly in the accident, that you didn't suffer. She believes you loved her more than anything in the world, and that your last words were about how proud you were of her. Tears started flowing down Jenny's face, a torrent of relief and profound sorrow. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Your new identity comes with strict rules. You'll live in a small town in Montana under the name Bethany Hickman. You'll work as a bookkeeper for a family-owned business. You'll have a modest apartment and a used car. You'll never contact anyone from your old life. Never try to research Casey or me. Never attempt to return to Seattle. And if I break these rules, Jenny asked, dreading the answer, then evidence will surface proving that Jenny Christian wasn't killed in an accident. She faked her death as part of Wesley Stratton's embezzlement scheme. Casey will learn that her mother was a criminal who abandoned her. The insurance money will be recovered. Casey's inheritance will be frozen pending legal proceedings, and you'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison. The brutality of the trap was perfect. Marco had ensured that any attempt by Jenny to reclaim her old life would utterly destroy the daughter she was trying to protect. You've thought of everything, haven't you? She whispered, staring at him, utterly defeated. I always do. 3 days later, Jenny found herself in the passenger seat of Gerald Christian's pickup truck, driving through the vast, empty Montana countryside toward her new life. Gerald had been silent for most of the journey, the weighty consequences of his role hanging heavy between them. But as they neared their destination, he finally spoke, his voice low and unexpected. You know he still loves you, Gerald said quietly, his eyes fixed on the winding road. Funny way of showing it, Jenny replied, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Marco doesn't forgive. Never has. Not since our father left. But he also doesn't hate without cause. What you did to him. What you did to Casey. It broke something in him that can't be fixed. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. Gerald glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his gaze unwavering. Mistakes are forgetting anniversaries or leaving the milk out. What you did was calculated betrayal over months. There's a difference. They drove in silence until they reached Bethany Hickman's new home, a small, unassuming apartment above a dusty bookstore in a town so remote it barely appeared on maps. This is it, Gerald said, handing her a set of keys and a thick envelope. Your new identity, social security card, driver's license, and enough money to get started. There's a job waiting for you at the hardware store. They think you're a widow from California looking for a fresh start. Will I ever see you again? She asked, her voice tinged with a desperate hope for some connection. No. As far as the world is concerned, Gerald Christian helped bury his sister-in-law 2 weeks ago. Bethany Hickman has no connection to anyone named Christian. As Gerald drove away, leaving her standing alone on a dusty street in the middle of nowhere, Jenny realized that Marco's revenge was complete. She was alive, but Jenny Christian was truly dead, buried in a cemetery in Seattle while her daughter mourned and her husband moved on with his life. But she was alive, and that, she grimly reflected, was more than Wesley could say from his federal prison cell. 6 months later, Marco Christian stood in his Seattle office, looking out at a city that no longer held any painful, lingering memories. Wesley Stratton had been sentenced to a crushing 35 years in federal prison. Ivan Graham had completed his cooperation agreement and disappeared into witness protection, a ghost. The insurance company had paid out Jenny's life insurance policy without question, a substantial sum. Christian Industries was more profitable than ever, having absorbed Wesley's partnership share and eliminated the systematic theft that had been bleeding money for months. Marco's net worth had actually increased since his wife's death, a stark, almost poetic testament to his victory. Casey was thriving. At 15, she'd blossomed into a confident, intelligent young woman who spoke about her mother with love, but without the crushing, debilitating grief that had characterized the first few months. She was getting straight A's, had been accepted into a summer program for gifted students, and seemed genuinely happy. Dad, are you ready for dinner? Casey asked, poking her head into his office, her smile bright. Almost finished here, Marco replied, closing the file he'd been reviewing, a faint smile touching his lips. Good. I'm making that pasta dish Mom taught me before she paused, the automatic reference to her mother still sometimes causing a flicker of sadness. "She'd be proud of how well you cook it," Marco said gently, his eyes warm. Casey smiled. "I think so, too." As they walked to the kitchen together, the aroma of her cooking already filling the air, Marco reflected on how completely his life had been reconstructed. He'd eliminated every trace of betrayal, protected his daughter's future, and ensured that those who tried to destroy him were permanently neutralized. In Montana, Bethany Hickman finished her shift at Rocky Mountain Hardware and walked the 3 quiet blocks to her small apartment. She'd lost 20 pounds. Her hair was shorter and darker now, and she dressed in simple, practical clothes that would have horrified the fashion-conscious Jenny Christian. But she was surviving. The work was honest, the town was quiet, and every month she received an unmarked envelope containing photos of Casey, at school, at home, with friends, watching her daughter grow up through carefully cropped photographs that revealed nothing about Marco's life. Casey looked happy. That was all that mattered. Bethany had tried once to research news about Seattle online. Within hours, her internet service had been cut off, and a man in a dark suit had appeared at her door with a stern reminder about the terms of her agreement. She never tried again. Some evenings she would sit on her apartment's small balcony and wonder if she could have made different choices. If she could have been satisfied with the life she'd had instead of risking everything for something more exciting, something she thought was better. But those thoughts led nowhere productive. Jenny Christian had made her choices, and Bethany Hickman lived with the consequences. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Marco had cautiously begun dating again, carefully, selectively, with women who understood that his daughter came first and that he wasn't interested in anything casual. He'd learned to trust his instincts about people, to spot the warning signs he'd so tragically missed with Jenny. "You know," Gerald said during one of their monthly dinners, looking at his brother over a glass of wine. "You could have just divorced her. It would have been simpler." "Simpler isn't always better," Marco replied, his gaze distant. "This way, Casey keeps her inheritance, her innocence, and her memories. Wesley and Ivan face actual consequences for their crimes, and I never have to worry about any of them returning to hurt my family again." "And you're okay with the fact that she's still alive out there?" Gerald pressed, a note of curiosity in his voice. Marco considered this, swirling the wine in his glass. "She's not alive. Jenny Christian is dead. There's a woman in Montana who looks like her, but Jenny Christian died in that car accident just like everyone believes." "That's a very clinical way of looking at it." "I'm a clinical person, Gerald. It served me well." As the months turned into years, the story of Marco Christian's tragic loss became just another piece of Seattle business folklore. The successful entrepreneur who'd lost his wife in a car accident discovered his business partner's betrayal, but emerged stronger than ever while raising his daughter alone. Casey graduated high school as valedictorian and was accepted to Stanford with a full scholarship. She decided to study business, wanting to eventually join her father's company. "I want to build on what you and Mom started," she told Marco during her graduation party, her eyes shining with ambition. "She'd be incredibly proud," Marco said, and in that moment, he truly meant it. In Montana, Bethany Hickman read about Casey's graduation in the newspaper clipping that arrived with her monthly photos. She cried for hours. Tears of pride, grief, and a profound, quiet acceptance all mixed together. Her daughter was successful, happy, and loved. That had to be enough. Marco's revenge was complete, not because he destroyed his enemies, but because he'd built something better, stronger, from the wreckage they'd tried to create. Casey would inherit an empire, never knowing her mother had tried to steal it. Wesley would spend his best years in prison, never knowing the woman he'd loved was still alive. And Jenny would spend her life watching from a distance, as the family she'd abandoned thrived without her. It was, Marco reflected, perfect justice. Not mercy, not forgiveness, but perfect, inescapable justice. And for a man who'd learned at 12 years old that the world was cruel and unforgiving, perfect justice was the only victory that truly mattered. 5 years after Jenny Christian's death, Marco stood at his daughter's college graduation, watching Casey accept her business degree with honors, radiant and full of promise. She was beautiful, brilliant, and completely innocent of the darkness that had once threatened to destroy their family. In the audience, he noticed a woman with short dark hair watching from the back row, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. For just a moment, their eyes met across the crowded auditorium. Bethany Hickman had broken the rules one last time, traveling across the country to see her daughter graduate. It was a risk that could destroy everything, but she had to see Casey's triumph with her own eyes. Marco could have had her arrested, could have exposed everything, and destroyed Casey's image of her mother forever. Instead, he simply nodded once, a brief, almost imperceptible acknowledgement that this moment belonged to both of them, regardless of everything that had come between them. Then, Casey was walking across the stage, accepting her diploma, and the moment passed. When Marco looked back, the woman in the baseball cap was gone. Later that evening, as Casey celebrated with her friends, Marco received a single text message from an unknown number. "Thank you." He deleted it immediately and never heard from Bethany Hickman again. Marco Christian had won completely, but he'd also learned that even perfect revenge could contain moments of imperfect mercy. It was, perhaps, the only lesson Jenny had left to teach him. The war was over. The victory was total. And somewhere in Montana, a woman who had once been his wife was learning to live with the consequences of betraying the one man who never forgave and never forgot. But their daughter would never know any of this. Casey Christian would inherit everything, believing her parents had loved each other, and that her mother had died believing in her daughter's potential. In the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered. What an incredible, chilling story of revenge and justice, right? It makes you wonder how far you'd go for the truth or for retribution. I'm really curious. Do you think Marco's actions were justified, or did he take it too far? What would you have done if you were in his shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear what you have to say.